I was standing in the hallway of my dorm, holding a college acceptance letter when my father showed up. He looked at the letter in my hand, then looked at me and said, "You think a piece of paper changes what you are? You are the dumb one. You have always been the dumb one, and I will make sure you stay that way." I looked straight into his eyes and said, "Then why are you so afraid of this letter?" The entire hallway went silent. Students stopped walking. Nobody said a word. My father stood there, and for the first time in my life he had no answer. Before I tell you how we got to that hallway, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from right now. If this story is already hitting close to home, go ahead and hit that like button, because what I am about to share gets so much heavier before it gets better. And if you have never subscribed to this channel, right now is a good time to do it, because the rest of this story is something you are going to want to hear all the way to the end. I promise you, the way this turns out is something I still think about every single day. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you about the house I grew up in, the man who ran it, and the system he built to keep all 4 of his children exactly where he decided they belonged. My name is Zephira. I am 28 years old. I am a pharmacologist. I live in Oklahoma. And for the first 18 years of my life, my father told everyone who would listen, including me, that I was the dumb one. His name was Dorian. He worked as an accountant. From the outside, our family looked like any other family in our part of Oklahoma. 4 kids, a house with a yard, a father who went to work every morning and came home every evening. My mother's name was Loretta. She was quiet, careful, and always seemed to find something to do in another room whenever my father's voice got cold. I say cold because my father was not the kind of man who screamed. He was the kind of man who lowered his voice when he was making a point, and somehow that was worse than screaming. When Dorian spoke quietly, everybody in that house stopped breathing until he finished. He had 4 children, and from the time each of us was small enough to sit at the dinner table without a booster seat, he assigned each of us a role. Not a nickname, not a playful label, a role, a fixed, permanent, non-negotiable identity that he enforced every single day. My oldest brother Vaic was 6 years older than me. Dorian called him the smart one. Vaic got the extra tutoring sessions. He got the bookshelf in his room stocked every September. He sat next to our father at dinner and was asked questions about what he was learning at school. When Vaic answered correctly, Dorian nodded. That nod was the closest thing to warmth our father was capable of. My second brother Vincenzo was 4 years older than me. Dorian called him the handsome one. Vincenzo was the one Dorian brought along when he had colleagues over or when the family went anywhere public. Vincenzo wore pressed clothes while the rest of us wore whatever was clean. He was the face my father wanted people to see when they looked at our family. My third brother Weston was 2 years older than me. Dorian called him the strong one. Weston was pulled out of bed at 5 in the morning starting when he was 6 years old and told to run 3 miles. Every morning, no exceptions. Weston was not allowed to cry. He was not allowed to say he was tired. He was not allowed to ask for a day off. Strength, according to our father, was something you built by never acknowledging that you needed rest. And then there was me, Zephira, the youngest, the only girl. Dorian called me the dumb one. I was not allowed to take extra classes. I was not allowed to ask questions at the dinner table. If I got something wrong on a school assignment, it was expected. If I got something right, it was suspicious. My father did not punish me for being curious. He did something much more effective. He made curiosity feel pointless. I remember the specific moment I understood what my role in this family actually meant. I was 8 years old. I spent 3 weeks working on a birthday card for my father. I drew a picture of the 4 of us kids standing in the yard, and I colored it carefully, and I wrote his name on the envelope in my best handwriting. On his birthday, I handed it to him at the table. He opened it, looked at the drawing for a few seconds, and then said, "Who drew this for you?" I told him I drew it myself. He looked at it one more time, set it down on the table, and went back to his meal. He never hung it on the wall. He never mentioned it again. That was the last time I made anything for my father with the hope that he might be proud of it. The one person outside our house who treated me like a normal child was our neighbor, a woman named Ida. She was retired, she had a porch full of books, and whenever I came over after school she would hand me something to read and ask me what I thought about it when I was done. She never told me the answers. She waited for me to figure them out. When my father found out I had been spending time at Ida's house, he walked over and told her directly that he did not need anyone interfering with how he raised his children. After that, I was not allowed to go to her porch anymore. Ida watched me from her window sometimes. I could see her there. She never stopped watching, even when there was nothing she could do. That was the world I grew up in. 4 children assigned 4 roles by a man who treated his family like a system he had designed and intended to maintain at all costs. And what I did not know yet, what none of us knew yet, was exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure nothing in that system ever changed. What I described in that first part, the labels, the control, the coldness, that was the surface of things. Underneath the surface, my father was doing something to each of us that took years to fully understand. With Vajek, the smart one, the problem was that Vajek loved to draw. He had loved it since he was small. He kept sketchbooks. He drew portraits of people on the street, buildings, hands, faces. When Dorian discovered the sketchbooks, he did not sit Vajek down and explain why art was not a useful pursuit. He collected every pencil, every pen, every pad of paper in Vajek's room and removed them. Then, some months later, when Vajek had saved up enough from a small allowance to buy a new sketchbook and had hidden it under his mattress, our father found it during one of his weekly room checks. He brought it to the kitchen, held it over the stove burner and let it catch. He did not say a single word while it burned. He put the ash in the trash, rinsed his hands, and went back to the living room. Vajek stood in the kitchen doorway and watched every page of his drawings turn black. None of us were allowed to react. With Vincenzo, the handsome one, the issue was food. Our father had decided that a handsome person needed to maintain a certain appearance, and he monitored Vincenzo's eating the way a person monitors a budget. On days he decided Vincenzo had eaten too much, Vincenzo was put on a single meal the following day. There were weeks where Vincenzo ate 1 real meal every 24 hours. He got good at hiding it. He got good at acting like nothing was wrong at the table. One evening at dinner, in the middle of reaching for his water glass, Vincenzo simply tipped sideways and slid off his chair. He had fainted from not eating enough. Our father lifted him, carried him to his room, laid him on his bed, and the next morning the schedule continued exactly as it had before. Nobody discussed what had happened. Nobody was allowed to. With Weston, the strong one, my father's method was relentless physical demand. Weston started that 5 a.m. run at age 6. By the time he was 12, the distance had increased, and the routine had expanded to include weight training in the garage after school. Weston was not permitted to skip a session for any reason, including injury. I remember a particular afternoon when Weston came home from school walking differently, favoring his left side. His left knee was swollen. I could see it through his sweatpants. He told our father at dinner that his knee was hurting, and he asked if he could take a day off from training. Our father looked at the knee, looked at Weston, and said, "Strong people do not ask for breaks." Weston trained the next morning on a swollen knee and did not say another word about it for months. And then there was what my father was doing to me. This is the part that took me the longest to understand, because I was living inside it without knowing what it was. Dorian had a connection to a man named Halloran. Halloran had previously had his medical license suspended in another state for practices that did not meet professional standards. My father found him anyway and established some kind of arrangement with him. Starting when I was 9 years old, I was given a pill every morning with breakfast. My father told me it was a vitamin. My mother handed it to me without comment. I swallowed it every single morning for 7 years without question, because I was 9 years old and my father told me to, and my mother stood there while he did it. The effects were real and they were consistent. I would sit in class and understand what the teacher was saying while the words were being spoken, but when I went to write something down or answer a question, there was a gap between what I knew and what I could produce. I read test questions multiple times, and the information I needed felt like it was behind a wall I could not get through. Teachers wrote notes home saying I seemed to struggle with retention. My father read those notes, handed them to me, and said, "See, even your teachers know." I believed him. I believed him for years. Because I was tired all the time and foggy in ways I could not explain, and the one adult in the house who was not my father stood quietly in doorways and handed me pills in the morning and never once told me what was actually in them. What none of my brothers knew, what I did not fully understand until years later, was that the 4 of us had each been assigned a form of damage that was specific and targeted. Vajek's creativity was destroyed. Vincenzo's body was being controlled through starvation. Weston was being pushed past the limit of what a child's joints could safely handle, and I was being chemically prevented from accessing the full function of my own mind. But here is what our father did not account for: we had each other. We could not speak freely in that house. We knew the walls had ears in the sense that Dorian paid attention to everything, and the one time Vincenzo had tried to talk to Loretta about how he felt, she had gone quiet for 2 days and then nothing changed. So we built something else. We built a system of our own. 3 knocks on the shared wall between our rooms meant, "I am okay. Do not worry about me tonight." 2 knocks back meant, "I hear you." A book placed upside down on the shared bookshelf in the hallway meant, "I need to talk. Find me after he is asleep." A small circle drawn in pencil in the upper left corner of a note tucked into a textbook meant, "I found something important." We used this system for years, quietly, without ever namming it out loud. It was the only private thing we had. The moment I remember most clearly is a night when I was 13. I had done badly on a science test, not because I had not studied, but because the wall came up again between what I knew and what I could write on the paper. My father had looked at the test, said nothing, and gone to his office. The silence was its own kind of punishment. That night after midnight I heard 3 knocks from Vayek's room. I knocked back twice. Then a folded piece of paper came under my door. I unfolded it on the floor in the dark. It said, "You are not what he says, I see you." I kept that piece of paper inside the lining of my left shoe for 7 years. Through the rest of middle school, through high school, through the first night I ever slept somewhere that was not that house. The paper went with me. I was 16 when I decided I was leaving. I had spent 2 years saving money, not the kind of saving where you put aside a significant amount each week. The kind of saving where you keep every quarter and every dollar bill you ever receive for any reason, birthday cards from relatives, change left on the counter, money our father gave us to buy school supplies where I bought the cheapest version of everything and kept the difference. After 2 years I had enough for a one-way bus ticket to the next city and a few dollars left over. I did not tell my brothers. I did not leave a note. I packed one bag the night before, hid it behind my winter coats, and the next afternoon I walked to the bus stop 3 blocks from school and I bought that ticket. The bus pulled out and I sat by the window and I watched Oklahoma move past the glass, and I let myself think for about 40 minutes that I had done it. My phone rang at mile 30. It was my father. His voice was the same as it always was. Quiet, measured. He said, "The next stop is Mill Road. Get off there, I will pick you up." He had put tracking software on all 4 of our phones without telling any of us. He had done it 2 years before that afternoon. He had simply watched the dot that represented me move along the bus route for 30 miles before calling. I got off at Mill Road. I stood on the shoulder of the road in the early evening and I did not cry. I made a deliberate decision not to cry, because I knew that if I walked back into that house with red eyes, my father would call it weakness, and I refused to give him that. The consequences were specific. He took my phone. He took the remaining money in my room, which he found by going through everything while I stood in the doorway and watched. He put a sliding bolt lock on the outside of my bedroom door, the kind that could only be operated from the hallway. From that point on, I only left my room when the bolt was opened, and I only left the house when Dorian or Weston was with me. 3 months passed. Then one afternoon I was looking for a pencil in the front hall closet, and a small folded flyer fell out of the pocket of Vincenzo's jacket. It was information about the GED program, the high school equivalency test available to students who were not in a standard school system. Vincenzo had clearly picked it up somewhere and then forgotten about it. He did not know I saw it. I read it once, memorized the website address, put it back in his pocket, and walked to the kitchen to get dinner ready. That night I drew a circle in the upper left corner of a folded note and slid it under the shared wall to Vayek's room. Vayek was 22 by then and still living at home. Something I understood later was because our father had made leaving feel impossible for all of us, each in different ways. He had a job, but Dorian controlled his finances and living arrangement the same way he controlled everything else. But Vayek had resources our father did not know about. He had a second email account. He had a small amount of money in a separate account he had opened without telling our father. 2 weeks after I slid that note under the wall, a tablet appeared under my door one night, the older kind, bought used, with a cracked corner. Vayek had purchased it from a classmate who was selling off electronics and had paid cash and said it was for his own use. I hid the tablet inside the box spring of my mattress. I charged it using the power strip behind my desk, which I rearranged so the extra cord was not visible. I waited until after 2 in the morning, when I could hear Dorian's television turn off and the house go silent, and then I studied. It was during this period that I made a discovery that changed the way I understood my entire childhood. One week, my father went out of town for a work conference. He was gone for 5 days. During those 5 days, Loretta handed me my vitamin in the morning as usual, but on the second day she got a phone call while she was preparing the pills and walked out of the kitchen. I looked at the small white pill on the counter and I made a decision. I put it in my pocket instead of my mouth. I did the same thing the next day and the day after. By the 4th day of not taking the pill, I sat down with the tablet and the study materials for the GED, and I read through an entire chemistry unit in one sitting. I answered every practice question at the end without losing the thread of my thinking once. I finished and looked at what I had done, and then I sat very still for a long time. I had always known something was different when I was in class. I had always sensed a wall that other students did not seem to have, but I had been told for so long that the wall was me, that the wall was simply what my mind was like, that I had accepted it. Sitting with that tablet on the 4th day without the pill, I understood for the first time that the wall was not me. The wall had been put there. I took one of the remaining pills and wrapped it tightly in a small square of aluminum foil. I hid it inside a hollowed-out eraser at the bottom of my pencil case. I did not know yet exactly what I was going to do with it, but I knew I needed to keep it. I passed the GED 6 months later. The coordination to make it happen involved all 3 of my brothers. On the morning of the exam, Weston woke up at 5:30 a.m. and told our father over breakfast that his stomach was hurting badly. He exaggerated the symptoms without overplaying them. He hit the right level of discomfort to make Dorian feel he had to take him to an urgent care clinic across town, which was a 45-minute drive each way and typically had a long wait. While Dorian was occupied with Weston, Vincenzo texted our father a continuous stream of updates about Weston's condition, questions about insurance cards, questions about parking, whatever he could think of to keep Dorian's attention directed at his phone and away from the house. Vaic drove me to the testing center. He parked in the lot and stayed there for the entire 3 hours of the exam. He did not come inside. He sat in his car and waited. I finished every section of the GED. I answered questions in mathematics and science and language arts without a gap between what I knew and what I could write down. When I walked out of the testing center and got into the passenger seat of Vaic's car, I did not say anything for a few minutes. Neither did he. Then I told him I thought I had done well. He nodded and started the car. The results came back 2 weeks later to the email address Vaic had set up for me. My scores placed me in the top 15% in the state of Oklahoma in both mathematics and science. That night I heard 3 knocks on the wall. I knocked back 4 times. We had never used 4 knocks before. 4 knocks meant I did it. Vaic sat in his room and, as he told me years later, cried for the first time since he was a child. I did not hear him, but I know it happened because he told me, and Vaic does not say things that are not true. I applied to 3 universities in Oklahoma. I used the email address Vaic had created. I used Vaic's phone number as my contact. I listed the GED scores. I wrote an application essay about pursuing a degree in natural science. I did not mention my father anywhere in that essay. I did not need to. One school offered me a partial scholarship in the natural sciences program. The letter came to Vaic's phone as a notification. He walked to my bedroom door, knocked in the regular way, and when I opened it he held up his phone so I could read the screen. I read it twice. Then I closed the door and sat on the floor. I made a decision that night about how I was going to leave. I was not going to sneak out. I was not going to disappear while Dorian was at work. I was going to do it in the morning in daylight with my bag packed, and I was going to tell him directly. The morning I chose, I packed one bag, carried it downstairs and set it by the front door. I walked to the kitchen where my father was sitting with his coffee. I placed the acceptance letter on the table in front of him. I said, "I got into college. I am leaving this afternoon." He picked up the letter and read it. He set it back on the table. He picked up his coffee cup again and said, "You will be back by the end of the week." That was all. No raised voice. No demand that I sit back down. He simply stated what he believed was going to happen and then went back to his morning as though the conversation was already over. I picked up the letter, put it in my bag and walked out the front door. The first week of college was the first week of my life in which I controlled my own time completely. I slept without a bolt on the outside of my door. I went to the dining hall and chose what I wanted to eat. I sat in class in any seat I wanted, and when a professor asked a question, I raised my hand without being called on, without asking permission, without waiting to be told whether I was allowed to contribute. I read in the library until 11 at night because I wanted to. I called Vincenzo every evening. During that week, I also made use of the tablet and the wrapped pill I had carried with me. I found a basic chemistry lab space open to first-year students for supervised independent work. I waited until a session when the lab assistant was occupied with another student, and I used the equipment to run a simple preliminary analysis on the compound in that pill. The results were not definitive, not in a first-year teaching lab with basic materials, but they were enough. What I was looking at was not a vitamin supplement. The chemical profile was inconsistent with any nutritional compound I could match. I photographed the results on my phone. I saved the photos in a folder I labeled Lab Practice, and I kept the foil-wrapped pill in the same pencil case where it had always been. On the 8th day, I was in my dorm room after a morning class when my roommate knocked on the open door and said there were 2 men in the hallway asking for me by name. I walked out and saw my father standing 12 feet from my door. Weston was behind him, 1 step back, not making eye contact with me. My father was holding a small cloth bag. I could see the outline of something inside it. He told me, with no change in his voice and no hesitation, that he had been to the university administration office that morning. He had brought a copy of my high school transcripts, but not the originals. He had brought a version that showed different grades than what I had actually earned, lower in several key areas, and he had asked the administration to review my scholarship eligibility based on this information. The administration had not yet processed his request. Then he said he had spoken with Halloran. He said Halloran had prepared something that could address the part of my brain that was causing me to make decisions like this. He used the word procedure. He said it could be done quickly. He opened the top of the cloth bag just enough for me to see the capped syringe inside. And then he said it, the sentence I had been hearing in different forms my entire life, the one that was supposed to be the last word on who I was and what I was worth. You think a piece of paper changes what you are. You are the dumb one, you have always been the dumb one, and I will make sure you stay that way. I looked at him, I looked at that bag, I looked at Weston standing behind him with his eyes on the floor, and I said, "Then why are you so afraid of this letter?" The hallway was quiet. Other students had slowed down or stopped when they heard a man's voice speaking with that particular kind of cold certainty. Nobody moved. Dominic Reyes was the campus security officer on duty for that building. He came around the corner during his routine hall check and took in the situation in about 4 seconds. He saw the bag in my father's hand. He saw the shape of the syringe through the cloth. He saw my face and he saw Weston's face. He stepped between my father and me and said, "Sir, I need you to step back." My father did not step back. Reyes called for additional security and campus police through his radio. Within 2 minutes there were 3 more people in that hallway. My father still had not moved from the spot where he was standing. He seemed genuinely unprepared for the possibility that anyone was going to stop him. While we waited for campus police to arrive, and while Reyes kept himself positioned between my father and me, something happened that I had not expected. Weston looked up from the floor. He looked at me directly for the first time since they had arrived. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake when he spoke. He said, "I am sorry, I should not be here." Those 8 words were the first time in my life that any member of my immediate family had chosen my side out loud, in front of our father, with Dorian standing right there to hear it. Campus police arrived and took control of the situation. My father was detained. The bag with the syringe was treated as evidence. Weston cooperated with every question they asked him. I went back into my room, sat down on the edge of my bed and stayed there for a while without doing anything in particular. Not because I was in shock exactly, but because the thing I had been running from had finally followed me all the way to the one place I had believed I could exist as myself, and I needed a few minutes to understand that it had not won. It had shown up, but it had not won. What happened after that night in the dormitory hallway did not happen all at once. It happened in layers. Each layer came with information that added to what had come before, and each new piece of information was worse than the last. The first layer was the pill. I gave campus police the foil-wrapped pill from my pencil case, along with the photos of my preliminary lab results. They submitted both to a forensic laboratory for full analysis. The results came back 11 days later. The compound in that pill was a combination of substances associated with suppressing sustained attention and slowing cognitive processing speed. It was not a vitamin. It had never been a vitamin. I had been given this compound every morning from age 9 to age 16, a total of approximately 2,500 doses, by my father, with the assistance of a man who had already lost his license to practice medicine in another state for ethical violations. The second layer was the birth certificate. When investigators went through documents in my father's files, they found my original birth certificate. In the lower right corner in my father's handwriting were the words, "Developmental concerns noted at birth." There was no physician's signature next to this notation. There was no medical record supporting it. It was something my father had written on an official document himself, before I was old enough to speak, as the beginning of a record he intended to build around me. When the investigator showed me a photograph of that notation during an interview, I did not say anything for a moment. I just looked at it. He had started before I was old enough to form a memory. The label had not come from anything I did or did not do. It had been decided before I ever had a chance. The third layer was the emails. When investigators accessed Dorian's devices under the authority granted by the initial detention and subsequent warrant, they found a correspondence history with Halloran spanning nearly a decade. In one email, written when I was 9 years old, my father wrote, "She is starting to ask too many questions. We need to keep the dosage consistent." I was told about this email during a follow-up interview. The investigator read it to me from a printed transcript. When he finished reading, he looked up, and I could tell he was watching for my reaction. I did not have a visible reaction. Not because I was not affected, but because I had spent 18 years learning how to hold my face still in moments that were designed to break me, and some habits take time to unlearn. The fourth layer was Weston's recording device. 3 days after the dormitory incident, a package arrived at the office of the attorney who had been assigned to my case through the university's Student Legal Services office. Inside was a small external drive. The note attached to it said only, "From Weston, for Zephyra." On that drive were approximately 14 hours of audio, recorded over 3 years using the recording function on a sports watch Weston wore every day. Weston had started recording 2 years before the dormitory incident, without telling anyone, because he had begun to understand that what was happening in our house was not normal, and that someday someone was going to need proof. In those 14 hours were conversations between my father and Halloran about dosages and scheduling. There were instructions Dorian gave Weston about how to monitor me on days when Dorian was not home. There were things said in that house that no one outside of it was ever supposed to hear. The fifth layer was the tracking device. When I unpacked my bag fully in the days after the dormitory incident, I found something in the interior lining of the backpack I had brought from home. It was a small GPS unit, less than 2 inches long, sewn into a pocket along the bottom seam. My father had put it there before I left the house. Before the morning, I placed my acceptance letter on the kitchen table in front of him. He had planned for the possibility that I would go, and had installed his way of following me before I walked out the door. This piece of evidence added unlawful surveillance and electronic monitoring to the case. Vincenzo's story happened separately but in parallel. 2 days after the dormitory confrontation, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was Vincenzo, calling from a phone that belonged to a neighbor of the house where he had spent the previous night. He told me he had left the night before with one bag and had called a taxi from a neighbor's porch while our father was asleep. He had gone to a family shelter in Oklahoma City that accepted adults fleeing domestic situations. The woman who managed the intake at that shelter was named Maya. Maya connected Vincenzo to a legal aid attorney within 48 hours of his arrival. Vincenzo did not have money, he did not have many possessions, but he was out of that house and he was safe, and that was the thing that mattered first. Weston's injury became its own turning point. After he cooperated with campus police on the night of the dormitory incident, Weston returned home because he did not yet have anywhere else to go. The following morning, our father required him to complete his training session as scheduled. Weston's left knee, which had been accumulating damage from years of mandatory high-impact training without adequate rest or medical treatment, gave out during that session. He could not finish. He drove himself to an emergency care facility. The emergency physician who examined him found a pattern of joint stress inconsistent with normal athletic wear for a person Weston's age. She asked Weston direct questions about his training history and living situation. Weston answered them honestly for the first time in his life when speaking to someone outside our family. The physician made a mandatory report to Adult Protective Services that same evening. A social worker made contact with Weston the following morning. He provided a full account. He also told them about the recording drive he had sent to my attorney. My father was arrested at the university campus gate 2 days after the dormitory incident when he returned to campus. He told the officer at the gate that he was there to collect personal belongings belonging to his daughter. Campus police, who had been notified to watch for him, met him at the entrance. The handcuffs went on at the gate of the school where his daughter was enrolled on a merit scholarship that he had spent her entire childhood trying to prevent her from being able to earn. The court issued an emergency protective order within 72 hours of his arrest, covering all 4 of us. Dorian was not permitted within 100 yards of any of his children. Halloran's situation moved through a separate but connected process. The Oklahoma State Medical Board opened a formal investigation based on evidence from the criminal case. During that investigation, they found that the conduct in my case was not an isolated incident. Halloran's license to practice medicine in Oklahoma was revoked 6 weeks after the case was filed. He was also named as a co-respondent in the civil portion of the legal proceedings. Throughout all of this, Vaic stayed in Oklahoma City and did not speak to the press. A local news outlet that picked up the story tried to reach family members for comment. Vaic called me after they contacted him. He said he had one thing to tell them and had already told them. This story belongs to my sister, not to me. Loretta was not charged. The evidence did not establish that she had directly participated in obtaining or administering the compound, or that she had knowledge of Halloran's involvement. But during her deposition, she was asked a direct question. Did she know that the pills I took every morning were not vitamins? She was silent for 30 seconds before she answered. The transcript records her answer as, "I did not ask what was in them." The transcript also records those 30 seconds of silence. They were entered into the record. Loretta and Dorian's marriage ended 3 months into the legal proceedings. She filed the paperwork herself. Dorian entered a guilty plea through a negotiated agreement that covered 4 charges: child endangerment and neglect, unlawful administration of a controlled substance to a minor, electronic surveillance without consent, and criminal threatening with a medical instrument. The agreement required him to serve a 10-year no-contact order covering all 4 of his children and to participate in a mandatory weekly psychological treatment program for the duration of the order. He did not go to prison. I want to be clear about that because sometimes when people hear a story like this they expect a more cinematic ending where the wrongdoer goes behind bars and stays there for a long time. That is not what happened. What happened was that a man who had spent decades exerting control over 4 children and had documented that control in emails and recorded conversations and pharmaceutical records was confronted with the weight of all of it, and he took the deal that his attorney negotiated. He accepted the consequences that the legal system offered him, not the ones I would have chosen. I have thought about that a great deal since then. The legal process was not perfect. It gave me protection and documentation and a formal record of what had been done. It did not give me back the years. Nothing gives those back. After my scholarship was reviewed using my actual high school transcripts, the originals which the school provided directly to the university when contacted by legal representatives, the award was not only reinstated, but increased. The Academic Review Board examined my full file, including the circumstances of the case, and determined that additional financial support was appropriate. I enrolled in a full course load that same semester. I finished my undergraduate degree in natural science, then I applied to pharmacy school. The reason I chose pharmacology is not complicated. I spent 7 years of my childhood taking a compound that altered the way my brain functioned, administered by my father through a physician who had already been deemed unfit to practice in another state, and I never knew what it was. I decided that understanding how pharmaceutical compounds interact with the developing nervous system was going to be the thing I built my professional life around. Not as revenge, as purpose. At the end of my pharmacy school program, I submitted a graduate thesis on the long-term cognitive effects of sustained exposure to attention-suppressing compounds during childhood development. I stood at the front of a conference room and presented that research to a panel of faculty reviewers. I did not read from notes. I did not look at the floor. I answered every question they asked me. Nobody in that room knew why I had chosen that specific subject until I told them in the acknowledgements section of the written thesis. And even then I told them in 2 sentences, this research is personal. It is also necessary. 2 years after the legal case concluded, a letter arrived at my home address from my father's attorney. My father was requesting contact. The letter described his progress in mandatory therapy. It mentioned growth and reflection. It mentioned a willingness to apologize. And then, near the end of the letter, it noted that there was a matter related to a family property that required a signature from all 4 children. That last paragraph told me everything I needed to know about why the letter had been sent. I gave the letter to my attorney. I asked her to respond on my behalf with a single message, I have nothing to sign. That was the full extent of my response. I did not write back personally. I did not arrange a meeting. I did not send a message through Vaic or Vincenzo or Weston. I had nothing to sign and I said so, and that was the end of it. As of right now, Vaic runs a small design studio in Tulsa. The walls of his workspace are covered in artwork, every inch of them. He told me recently that he cannot imagine working in a room that does not have drawings on the walls. He said it the way someone says something obvious, matter of fact, like it is simply a fact about himself that he has always known. I think for a long time he did not get to know that about himself. Now he does. Vincenzo cooks professionally at a restaurant in Oklahoma City. He told me once that he never skips a meal and that he never will. He said it without drama, just as information. He also said the thing he likes most about his job is feeding people, being the reason someone sits down and eats something good. I thought about that for a long time after he told me. Weston had surgery on his left knee and completed a full recovery. He works now as a fitness trainer for adolescents. The first thing he tells every new client is that rest is part of training and that no one has the right to take that from them. He says he tells them this every single time with every new client without exception. I believe him. And me, I am a pharmacologist. I work at a hospital in Oklahoma. I am 28 years old and I have a career built entirely on understanding what compounds do to the human body, specifically to developing minds, specifically to children who cannot advocate for themselves because they do not know what is being done to them. There is one moment I think about more than any other when I think about how far I have come from that house. It is not the moment in the dormitory hallway. It is not the day I got my test results back. It is not even the day I stood in front of the faculty panel and presented my thesis. It is the morning that followed the reinstatement of my scholarship. The first day of a new semester with a full course load and a restored financial award and a legal protective order between me and my father. I walked into the lecture hall and chose a seat in the front row, center. The professor opened the class with a question. I raised my hand before she finished asking it. She called on me, I answered. My voice did not shake. My hand did not come down early. I had spent 18 years in a house where raising my hand was something that got punished, where having an answer was evidence of a problem, where my father had gone to significant effort, documented effort, medically assisted effort, to make sure that I would never be in a position to do what I was doing in that moment. My father called me the dumb one. He wrote it on my birth certificate before I had words to argue with. He put it in emails. He paid someone to make it chemically true. My diploma says Zephira, and my patients call me doctor. If this story reached something in you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, was there someone in your life who tried to define what you were capable of before you had a chance to find out for yourself? What did you do with that? I want to read what you write. If you made it to the end of this video, please take a moment to like it. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, I want you to know that every story on this channel is built the same way this one is. No shortcuts, no exaggeration, just the truth of what people go through and what they find on the other side of it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs to hear that what other people decide about you does not have to be the final word on who you become. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. You did not have to do that, and the fact that you did means more than I can say in a closing line. Take care of yourself, and if nobody has said it to you recently, you are allowed to take up space, ask questions, and be exactly as capable as you actually are.